The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So yesterday we talked about the passing of 79-year-old right-wing Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. I told you that many Republicans, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, were saying there is not going to be any appointment until after the presidential election. We have to let the people have a say. And of course, this was absolutely and comically ridiculous. The people had a say. They elected President Obama to serve from January of 2013 until January of 2017. And any Supreme Court vacancies that come up during that time are President Obama's to nominate a candidate for. Now, we've been investigating what was probably hypocrisy, probably a double standard on the behalf of Republicans. And oh, what we turned up, Lewis. The entire framing from the Republicans is based on a sort of two-part idea, right? Part one of the idea is Supreme Court openings in the last year of a presidency are rare, and thus we should handle them differently than we would during other years of a presidency. And that it is controversial or unusual with less than a year before the next election to decide on new justices, right? That's sort of what the Republican obstruction is based on. The idea that these situations are both rare and very, very controversial. Both assertions are totally laughable. And I want to go in order and really, as I like to do, piece by piece, break this down for you. So let's look at assertion number one, that these Supreme Court vacancies in presidential election years are rare. That is not true. 8 times during the 20th century, there were election year Supreme Court nominees. Okay, that is number one. But no question about it whatsoever. That is absolutely the reality. So then the next question is, okay, well, is it common or rare that when there are these election year Supreme Court nominees, that they are confirmed? Let's now analyze that bit of data. 6 times during the 20th century, 6 of those 8 times, election year Supreme Court nominees were confirmed. So the 2 times where this didn't happen, Lewis, one was due to just lack of time to get it done. Right now, it is not pressing. We have plenty of time to get a new Supreme Court justice nominated and confirmed. One of the 2 times where it didn't happen during a presidential election year, there really wasn't enough time. Okay, and that's just an empirical fact. The other time, there was bipartisan filibustering of a Lyndon B. Johnson nominee in a sort of very specific situation. It wasn't just like a partisan obstruction situation like we have now, but it gets even better because when we look at Mitch McConnell and the current Republicans specifically, you will note that in 1988, Mitch McConnell himself, who is leading the charge to obstruct President Obama's eventual Supreme Court nominee, in 1988, McConnell himself voted to confirm a Supreme Court nominee during Ronald Reagan's last year in office. That nominee happened to be current Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy. And in addition to that, Chuck Grassley also voted to confirm Anthony Kennedy in 1988. We'll talk more about Chuck Grassley a little bit later. So, broadly speaking, what statistics do we have about how long it takes to confirm a Supreme Court justice? Would it be rushed for President Obama to do this right now with 9 months left until the next election and 11 months left until the next president would take over? Absolutely not. Let's take a look at some of the data involved there. Number one, the Senate has never taken more than 125 days to vote on a successor to the Supreme Court from the time of their nomination. 125 days. Keep that number in mind. Number two, the average time to confirmation or rejection or withdrawal of a Supreme Court nominee is 25 days. 25 days. And since 1975, the average days from nomination until the final Senate vote have been 67. Okay, so now that we know those numbers, how much time do we have? Upon Justice Scalia's death, 342 days remained in President Obama's second term, Lewis. Nearly 3 times the maximum that it has ever taken the Senate to vote on a successor for a Supreme Court position. Absolutely no reason whatsoever that President Obama shouldn't be able to nominate and get a decision, a vote from the Senate on his replacement for Antonin Scalia.
I think you're forgetting one important reason.
Oh, go ahead.
Obama is a socialist, communist, terrorist, Indonesian Muslim, hell-bent on destroying the country. You forgot about that.
Without considering that, it might seem like there's a Republican double standard, but I guess the double standard is that we aren't realizing how different President Obama is from past presidents. Yeah, so absolutely ridiculous. Don't fall for the right-wing nonsense. Now, I want to delve more deeply into one of those names I mentioned, Chuck Grassley. Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican from Iowa, is joining this growing list of Republicans who are saying, no, President Obama, you cannot nominate someone to replace right-wing Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. It's the last year of your presidency. We need to wait. We've already debunked how that this makes absolutely no sense historically. But now I want to look specifically at the intellectual bankruptcy of someone like Chuck Grassley making this argument. Chuck Grassley is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he holds really a pretty big role in the confirmation process. And as the Judiciary Committee initiates the vetting process for nominees, and they oversee all confirmation hearings, it's important to remember Chuck Grassley's past on this issue. Chuck Grassley said in a statement released just 2 days ago, the fact of the matter is that it's been standard practice over the last nearly 80 years that Supreme Court nominees are not nominated and confirmed during a presidential election year. Let's stop there. We've debunked that. I mean, that's just not true. We've seen 8 times during the 20th century that there were Supreme Court vacancies filled during a presidential election year. In 6 of those 8, the nominees were confirmed. In 1 of those 8, there really wasn't enough time and there was a temporary appointment made. And in another, there was a very unusual filibuster situation, a bipartisan filibuster of LBJ. So that is not true. Then Chuck Grassley goes on to say, given the huge divide in the country and the fact that this president, above all others, has made no bones about his goal to use the courts to circumvent Congress and push through his own agenda, it only makes sense that we defer to the American people who will elect a new president to select the next Supreme Court justice. Bogus. The American people have already voted. This is 2016. For 2017, the American people will vote on who next gets to select Supreme Court justices. The American people have already voted. I mean, Lewis, this is all completely undeniable. I mean, how can you argue against any of these facts? Chuck Grassley is just living in a fantasy world here.
Why can't we just let this country run and things operate the way they're supposed to operate? Why can't we do that?
We just can't do it because of people like Chuck Grassley. Now, here's the real double standard of the Chuck Grassley. Chuck Grassley, during a 2008 Senate Republican conference hearing about, quote, removing politics from the judicial confirmation process, said he was displeased with what he called, quote, unjustified slowness of the confirmation process because he felt Democrats were holding up George W. Bush's Supreme Court nominees for partisan reasons. This guy is so transparently one-sided and hypocritical here. The guy who said Democrats shouldn't slow down the nomination process for Bush nominees in 2008, mind you, the last year of Bush's presidency, is now saying, hey, we've got to wait for the next president before we nominate anybody here. This guy is a total joke. I mean, he's a despicable joke.
Yes, any Republican in Congress in his position would do the same thing. It's like a gang. The Democrats, too. It's basically a gang, and this is gang politics.
Is this happening again on the Democratic primary side? Yesterday, I told you that Nevada is now in play, right? We had a, yes, admittedly Republican poll, which had the race 50-50 in Nevada. 538.com also says Bernie Sanders basically has a 50% chance of winning the Nevada primary. And now we see new data from South Carolina. Could South Carolina now be in play, considered to be an absolute Hillary Clinton stronghold? Let's look at the data here. Looking at the Real Clear Politics average of polls, you'll notice that in June of 2015, mid-June, Bernie Sanders had 4.7% support in South Carolina. And in July and August, and it's in September, it crept into the double-digit support level, reaching 20% by October 15th of 2015. And then it dropped a little bit in November and then recovered in December. And then in January, it really started popping up. And according to the most recent data we have from South Carolina, Lewis, Bernie Sanders has increased his support to 35.5% in that state of South Carolina, presumed to be definitely a huge win for Hillary Clinton. Now, let's be sober and nuanced here. Bernie Sanders' support has increased more than 7 times over in South Carolina since mid-June of 2015. He is still down by an average of 24 percentage points in recent polls, but the trend is there.
Yes. So it might be another Iowa situation. If he keeps gaining momentum like this, he could close the gap, right?
February 20th, we will have the Nevada caucus for the Democrats. That is this Saturday, right? Yes, Saturday. If Nevada ends up going 50-50, and there's every indication right now that Nevada has become a 50-50 state for Democrats, you then have another week before the South Carolina Democratic primary, and anything could happen. With this trend line, if Bernie again comes away from Nevada with 50%, again, we have these superdelegates who can do whatever they want, and we've already heard from some of them that they will be doing absolutely whatever they want, meaning supporting Hillary Clinton, regardless of who wins the popular vote. Let's ignore that at least for now. Then, if we see that momentum, another 5 points for Bernie means 5 fewer points for Hillary, and he could come away in South Carolina with around 40% of the vote, and that would be, I mean, we can't even say how huge that would be. It would be absolutely incredible.
Yeah, so we're not going to count anything out here. Any of this is perfectly possible. Bernie could win both states, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, Bernie could win.
You're not going to
both
say
states.
it's impossible for Bernie to win both states.
I am not going to say it is impossible. Anytime you have 2 people on the ballot, and they will be on the ballot on Election Day, either of those people could win, no doubt about it. Being realistic here, yes, Bernie has gained significantly in South Carolina. He's still down more than 20 points. Can you close 20 points in 10 days?
But that's when he does his best, is right before the day.
Fair enough. Absolutely. Lewis is clearly more bullish on this than I am. I think Bernie Sanders will get more than 35% support in South Carolina, right? That's where he is now. I think he will get more than that. I don't know how much more. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Lewis Motamedi. And newly, Lewis, I am on Instagram. I am David.Pacman on Instagram. And I know Lewis loves it. Lewis is just on fire about my Instagram account.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com. The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com.
Our program is funded directly by you, viewers and listeners of The David Pacman Show, through something we call membership. Today's new member of the day is none other than the world-famous, Lewis, Katrine Jensen. Katrine, thank you so much for being a David Pacman Show member. You can join Katrine and get instant access to all of the exclusive member benefits at davidpacman.com/membership. And remember, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, stop by davidpacman.com/Amazon before you shop, and then anything you buy will send us a little kickback. Okay, today's time for the third new installment of Morality with Motamedi, where we go to Lewis with our pressing moral and ethical dilemmas. Today's is one where, to be honest, I'm a little scared about what Lewis is going to come up with, because Lewis has well, let me just present the scenario and we'll see what he comes up with. The scenario is as follows. A madman who has already detonated a bomb in a crowded area has been apprehended. And you know for a fact that there are more bombs planted and set to explode. It's likely that many people will die if these other bombs detonate. And authorities have done everything they can to make this madman divulge the location of the bombs using unenhanced interrogation techniques, right? Meaning he has not been tortured. He refuses to say anything, requests a lawyer to protect his rights. And you also know that even if you did torture this guy, he has been so well trained that you would not be able to get anything out of him. Okay. However, You know who his family is, and you know that his family is what is absolutely near and dear to him. And you suspect that he would talk if you were to torture his innocent wife, for example, instead. What do you do, Lewis? And this assumes a lot of things. This assumes, number one, that you could know for a fact that he would talk if you torture his wife. It assumes that you have access and resources to start torturing. It assumes a lot of different things. But the point is, morally, can you justify torturing the innocent wife of a madman in order to get him to spill the beans about where the bombs are?
Well, let me start by saying that what I would do if I knew this guy could not be tortured, could not be convinced in any way, I would fake or attempt to have the family help me in faking their torture to get this guy to talk. Now,
okay, let's assume, though.
Yes,
let's assume the family won't help you.
The family won't help
You could
me.
still fake it. That's an interesting idea.
Yes.
Make him believe you were torturing
Right.
the wife.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Okay, but let's say that doesn't work because then we don't have this moral dilemma.
Right. That's an easy way out.
If I knew for a fact that torturing the family of this man, let's just say it's his wife,
Just one person, yeah.
would save lives and would yield the information that we need to save lives,
Yeah.
even if you're just saving a few lives. Now, I'm not going to kill this woman. I'm going
Right.
to torture her.
Okay, good.
I would do it.
You would.
If I knew, this is assuming a lot, if I could say with certitude
Sure.
that this would give up the information, would you?
Before I give
The
my
thing is,
my
you
view on
can't
this,
know that.
Let's say you did, okay? Does that mean that your opposition to enhanced interrogation techniques, sort of in the modern world, where you never know for sure what you're going to get by using these, is that we know factually, typically, that when people are tortured, they say whatever they think the torturer wants to hear in
Right.
order to make it stop. So is it more of a pragmatic thing for you that you oppose torture now because you just don't think that it works? In other words, would you be more in favor of torture in the real world where you can't know for sure what you'll get if you knew or thought that it would be more effective? Is it like a sort of utilitarian thing?
Well, the reality is it just doesn't work. So I don't think a government should do that. I don't think we should do that, and it doesn't work. There's two perfectly good reasons why we just shouldn't do that.
So, but morally, you're not against torture.
In certain situations, I would say no. In this situation where that's been presented, if I know for a fact that torturing someone will save lives,
Yeah.
you kind of have to, don't you? Don't you have a moral obligation to save all of those other people?
Well, so let's then explore. You're morally against the death penalty, right? I mean, I know you're against
Yes.
the death penalty, but part of it is moral, and you use the same language. The state should not be doing that. Governments should not be doing that.
That is correct.
If you knew that in certain cases, instituting the death penalty would save lives, more than one life, sort of utilitarian approach, would you also be in favor of the death penalty, even though you claim to be morally against it?
I don't know how this could possibly happen. If I knew it would save more lives than it would end, I guess so, but that's impossible.
Very utilitarian approach, right? I mean, so when you look at the trolley problem, if you can push two people in front of a train to derail it and save the 100 people the train would otherwise have killed, you would do that because, hey, it's 2 people for 100. That's worth it in the utilitarian Lewis model.
Well, maybe. I don't know. That's a little bit different. The trolley situation just kind of feels different to me. Because
But is it?
Because you are not really involved, right? I mean, in this case, I am presumably law enforcement or someone who is tasked with keeping people safe.
Okay, let's say someone tasked you with making a decision about the trolley. I mean, okay, we're getting into the weeds sort of semantically here, but bottom line, in this particular scenario, you would not have a moral issue torturing an innocent...
Yeah, I wouldn't like it.
You wouldn't like it.
But I would do what needs to be done but let me remind people,
Would
because I know people...
it would be morally defensible.
Yes, because people are going to twist this, because the situation says that if I know that the torture would deal with the bombs and then I would get the information I need,
Right.
yes, I would. And mind you, I'm not killing anyone. This is just torture.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. It is called Morality with Motamedi, so I don't really need to comment right now. I'm going to wait until we do the follow-up on Thursday where we get responses from people and see what the audience thinks about this. Lewis, if he knew in this scenario that the torture of the wife would get the madman to tell you where the bombs are, Lewis would torture. He believes it to be absolutely morally defensible. Send us your thoughts. We will reconvene on Thursday and have follow-up from the audience. I predict outrage, but also I predict a lot of people who just agree with Lewis and say it's pretty pragmatic to do what Lewis is saying. Okay, Ted Cruz is hiring porn stars to act in his campaign ads. Not really, but there was a former softcore porn actress, and Lewis wants me to make that distinction. Softcore porn actress in a Ted Cruz presidential campaign ad. The Cruz campaign pulled the ad off the air after they figured out who one of these actresses was. The concept is Conservatives Anonymous. It's kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a parody of that. People meet to complain about having voted for Marco Rubio. You'll see that there's a woman in the video if you're watching. You'll hear her talking if you're listening. And she says, maybe you should vote for more than just a pretty face next time. Let's take a look at the video. Let's listen to it.
I voted for a guy who was a Tea Party hero on the campaign trail. And then he went to D.C. and played patty cake with Chuck Schumer and cut a deal on amnesty.
Does that make you angry?
Angry? Makes me feel dumb for trusting him.
Maybe you should vote for more than just a pretty face next time.
Right.
You guys have room for one more?
So that's...
Come on in.
Amy Lindsey, who is, she has quite a track record of appearing in softcore pornography. Her greatest hits include Kinky Sex Club, MILF, Sex Spa 2. Lewis hated Sex Spa 1 and 3, but 2, not a bad movie. Carnal Wishes, Animal Lust, and Lewis's favorite, merely for the cinematography, Insatiable Obsession. So her social media accounts feature pictures of her hanging out with porn star Ron Jeremy and of her promoting the movie MILF and blah, 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 blah. Weirdly enough, she also played the woman who married the Doctor in the alternate timeline in the finale of Star Trek Voyager, widely considered to be the worst of the Star Trek series. And I am considering Enterprise in that as well, Lewis. Okay, yeah, I mean, this is a crazy story, right? The Cruz campaign issued the following statement about Amy Lindsey, saying, the actress responded to an open casting call. She passed her audition and got the job. Unfortunately, she was not vetted by the casting company. Had the campaign known of her full filmography, we obviously would not have let her appear in the ad. The campaign is taking the ad down and will replace it with a different commercial. I have to tell you, Lewis, I don't really care about this. I mean, there are extensive pictures of more than one of Trump's wives doing relatively scantily clad modeling. And also, this is softcore pornography from years ago, which is basically equivalent to what you see in Game of Thrones now. I mean, if someone appeared nude in Game of Thrones in a simulated sex scene, would we say that that person is morally bankrupt and therefore any campaign that has that person in their ad? I mean, I think this is funny because of the so-called moral majority that these candidates claim to have. But quite frankly, this is like a non-starter for me. Who cares? This woman did nothing wrong.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't care at all. But Ted Cruz has to pretend to care.
Yeah.
He probably really doesn't care because that's who he has to appeal to.
My biggest problem with this woman is that apparently the actress herself, Amy Lindsey, is conservative. And I can only assume if you would consider voting for most of the Republican candidates right now, somewhere your common sense is not quite right. That's my biggest problem. Don't care about the softcore porn. I don't think the Cruz campaign did anything wrong. I think they have nothing to apologize for, but they've backed themselves into this corner, and it is hilarious to see it explode in their faces. And the funniest part is when they say, had we known she appeared nude on camera, we never would have included her in a campaign, regardless of whether her beliefs coincide with ours, which they seem to do. That's the funniest part about the Cruz sort of mea culpa on this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I am curious about her beliefs now because socially, you might think that someone like that is liberal.
Yeah.
But perhaps she just really feels very strongly about immigration or something like that.
Maybe that's her big issue. Yeah, I don't know. All right, we will be talking about this on our Reddit discussion forum at davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. After the break, we will explore where the idea of a 40-hour work week came from and if it's the most logical work week configuration. That's next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Benjamin Hunnicutt, who's a professor of leisure studies at the University of Iowa. He's also author of Kellogg's 6-Hour Day and Work Without End, Abandoning Shorter Hours for the Right to Work. It's so great to talk to you. We've been looking at labor and employment and jobs from a number of different angles over the last couple of years. But one we haven't explored in detail with an expert like you is this idea that there's sort of a diminishing productivity return for individuals who work longer days or longer weeks, etc. So let's start sort of at the very beginning. How and when did the so-called 40-hour work week become the sort of default in full-time jobs in the U.S.? How long has that been the status quo?
Since about the 1930s, mid-1920s, 1930s, it's sort of a mixed bag, but it was about then that the working week sort of stabilized. That's more or less what my scholarship is about. I'm a historian, and I have written about the history of working hours and what I call the great mystery, the great leisure mystery. For 100 years, working hours in the United States and indeed in the industrial world got shorter and shorter, cut in half by most accounts. No one expected the process to end in the early 20th century. In fact, everyone that noticed what was happening, people like John Maynard Keynes, predicted the process would continue, and that by 1980, we would be working like 2.5 hours a day at most. No one, I've been doing this almost 40 years, no one thought the process would stop.
And what has caused the process to sort of reverse, where we saw a period of the sort of contracting work week to a period of expansion where you now hear even almost people bragging about the number of hours they work as if it's connected sort of to the value of their job or existence in some way? What turned this trend around?
That's the burden of my book, is trying to solve the mystery. Why did this process that seemed inevitable stop? So there are a lot of answers, consumerism being one of them. We've chosen luxuries. We've chosen to buy things we've never seen before, never needed before. Certainly one of the answers. We've gone that way, luxuries and not leisure. The other is the government policy to maintain full-time, full employment, spending whenever necessary in deficit to stimulate the economy so that it provides, quote, full-time jobs. Full-time jobs was an invention of the Roosevelt administration, full-time at 40 hours a week. Before Roosevelt's administration, full-time job meant something that was declining gradually but steady, as testified by Kellogg's 6-Hour Day. The people that worked the Kellogg 6-Hour Day began in 1930. Thought it was simply the next step in this long process of work reduction. So the government steps in during the Great Depression when free time took the form of unemployment, stimulating the economy, creating, quote, full-time jobs, putting the kibosh on the process of work reduction that had happened for 100 years. The other is, that I've suggested in the Kellogg book, is that we have a different idea about work and leisure. Work has become something done for itself. It is self-justifying before the 20th century, well into the 20th century. Indeed, work was seen by a lot of people, the majority perhaps, as a means to an end, not an end in itself. Leisure was seen to be sort of the reward of industrial progress. Shorter hours and higher wages, that's what industrial progress meant before the modern age, before our time now. That concept of leisure being the fulfillment of an American dream. My most recent book, by the way, is Free Time, the Forgotten American Dream, put in a plug.
Yeah, so let's dig into this a little more. And Benjamin, if you can, when you talk, you're hitting your keyboard or your desk, and it's really very audible, so try to avoid doing that if you can. Talk to us a little bit about how we can sort of quantify this idea of diminishing productivity returns when we work longer days. In your research and estimation, at what number of weekly hours worked does the productivity decline so much that it's essentially not worth continuing to work?
Well, Kellogg's thought that 6 hours was optimal. The Kellogg's at Battle Creek, the creator of cereal that we all love, he instituted the 6-hour day, and he thought that he called it a sort of a relay race where people would come in fresh, work a top efficiency for 6 hours was optimal. Not only he, but a variety of what I've called liberation capitalists, people like W.K. Kellogg, but also Lord Leverhulme of Lever Brothers fame, the Soap King, someone called. All of those folks thought that 6 hours would be optimal, and even a 4-hour day was on the horizon as better still. That is, how much is produced per hour. Why not go to 4 6-hour shifts? Workers liked it. It was more productive. Why not then go to the 4-hour shift? And how many shifts that would be per day? 4, I guess, goes into 24. So and working at the peak efficiency, so that all of the lard is taken out of the day. 4 to 6 hours was seen at that time by these people. They did research. They counted the number of shredded wheat biscuits that were produced on an 8-hour day versus. And this experiment is even now ongoing in places like Metro Plastics in Indianapolis, Indiana. Leslie, Mr. Hahn, I can't remember his first name. He's the CEO of Metro Plastics. He's introduced the 6-hour day.
And Benjamin, let me interject here if I can for a second, just so we could sort of look at this from a couple of different angles. Most of the examples you're giving us relate to sort of production type industrial shift work. And I'm curious what your research has told us about these diminishing productivity returns with other types of jobs, right? Sort of modern economy 2.0 jobs working in the tech field, et cetera. What can we say about hours worked and productivity in sort of non-production type jobs? Is it similar, or is the dynamic different?
The dynamic is completely different. Jobs are beginning to shatter in terms of what my generation at least, understood as a regular job. Now jobs begin to be on call, show up when you on the computer when you have the time. It's harder and harder to quantify these things, and so the whole picture in terms of work life is beginning to change and change dramatically with the rise of things called the prosumers. Have you heard of prosumers? The producer and the consumer become one.
Right.
The work and leisure begin to blur. It's hard to tell. For example, a person that is, for example, are you familiar with the experience economy?
No, tell us about it.
Oh gosh, you should call Joe Pine at the University of Minnesota. He wrote a book some time ago, and look it up on the internet. It's all over the place. The book's called The Experience Economy, and his argument is that the economy is evolving from service and those jobs, manufacturing jobs, where people go to a place and work, to evolving into a new phase where people are buying more and more experiences rather than either services or goods or property or anything. So I'm convinced he is right that the economy is evolving in not only in terms of work time, but also what people are buying.
And is there any evidence, we sort of understand conceptually some of the negatives of this mixing between work and leisure time, the idea that people are never fully disconnected sort of from their job and responsibilities, and there aren't clear times of rest, et cetera. Are there any positives to this blending of work and leisure time that you could sort of suggest to us?
Yes, I think it is. I think there are positive possibilities. Negative ones as well, but the positive ones are things like the prosumer, the person who is more and more producing at the same time that they're consuming. Music, for example. Jeremy Rifkin's wonderful books about the economy, his the zero Marginal Cost Society, been recently out. He talks about these things, the rise of the prosumer. In music, for example, my daughter is very much a musician, and a lot of the music that she makes, she also provides on the internet for other people and groups of people who are sharing their music. So the sharing economy itself is a phenomenon that, again, it's hard to differentiate between a person's work and a person's leisure. The consumption and production are begin to be one and the same. The rise of things like energy. Jeremy Rifkin's point is, as more and more people are able to buy solar panels, for example, and install them and feed the power back into the grid, the more and more the prosumer will be in control. Energy will begin to be cheaper and cheaper, and those things would further erode traditional types of markets, traditional types of work. Work, I think, is changing dramatically as we watch.
All right, that is all the time we have today. We've been speaking with Professor Benjamin Hunnicutt, professor of leisure studies at the University of Iowa. His most recent book, Free Time: The Forgotten American Dream. Very interesting topic. Thanks so much for talking to us today.
Certainly. Welcome, David. Bye-bye.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've seen some pretty funny stuff happen so far with Republican campaign ads this election season. Earlier today, I told you about Ted Cruz having a softcore porn actress appear in one of his videos, which quite frankly, I don't think is really a big deal, but apparently his campaign had to distance themselves from it. Donald Trump had this anti-immigration ad with footage of people fervently, to quote Lewis, I know it's not a real word, check it out on Urban Dictionary, fervently crossing over from Morocco to Spain, and it was meant to represent immigration from Mexico into the United States. Total embarrassment. And now Marco Rubio has entered into contention for the funniest misuse of footage to make a political point. Senator Marco Rubio, who is a Republican presidential candidate, had a new ad released over the last 24 hours, and you see a boat crossing a very picturesque harbor, and the narration says it's morning again in America, although it actually isn't America. It's not the United States that's pictured. It's Canada, Vancouver, in fact. Let's take a look at the video and listen to the very, very wonderfully done narration.
I voted for a guy who was a Tea
Wrong
Party.
clip, though. That's the other one. Let's take a look at the Rubio one.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women are out of work than ever before in our nation's history. People paying more in taxes than they will for food, housing, and clothing combined. Nearly $20 trillion.
Right. So it is indeed morning in America.
Should we show that shot one more time real quick, that opening scene?
Take a look at it once more.
That's it right there.
Yeah.
It's morning again in America.
But that's actually Canada. So the Rubio campaign was asked about this. They said, well, we're not going to make Canada an issue in this election. I guess inadvertently doing that. What was interestingly enough left out of the ad was some kind of statement dispelling with this fiction that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing, because Lewis, he knows exactly what he's doing.
Very good. Yes. Let's dispel with this fiction that Vancouver footage is just so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
So many movies shot in Vancouver. This was stock footage.
Right.
That I guess some production company or whoever bought from some guy who just sells stock footage.
Yeah.
And guess they didn't care where it was coming from, or they thought no one would notice.
You know, footage of Vancouver is so ubiquitous that even in Nigerian campaign ads, often they open and it's still Vancouver that they have on camera, just because it's so easy and ubiquitous to you can really find that footage easily. So everybody's using it. It's just way more noticeable when a Nigerian political ad says, "This is morning in Nigeria," and it's actually the ferry in Vancouver. What they meant to show was that Hillary Clinton was going to turn the U.S. into Canada or something like that.
Or Obama was going to, or Bernie was going to with his national health care plan. Maybe that's more accurate.
Remember this whole backstory of Donald Trump threatening to run as a third-party candidate? but then signing that pledge, which was worth absolutely nothing, saying he wouldn't run as a third-party candidate. And then he was interviewed at a couple of Republican debates ago. And after the debate, he said, oh, no. Listen, I love what the Republican Party has done. They've embraced me. I've loved participating in these Republican debates. I'm definitely going to run as a Republican. But now Donald Trump may be changing his tune yet again. He says he's been treated unfairly in the most recent Republican debate. And he's again hinting that he might run as a third-party candidate. He was speaking in sort of outside of Charleston, South Carolina yesterday. And he hinted that if the Republican Party keeps treating him unfairly in the way that they did in the last debate, he might go back on that pledge, saying, quote, I signed a pledge, but it's a double-edged pledge. And as far as I'm concerned, they, meaning the Republican Party, are in default of the pledge. He says that the Republicans aren't honoring the pledge. He hasn't really elaborated about it, but he said the most recent debate was a disgrace and that the Republican National Committee does a terrible job. I love this, Lewis. I could not care less about the ethics or morals of Donald Trump violating this worthless piece of paper he signed saying he would run as a Republican or not at all. Donald Trump running as a third-party candidate, even with a third of the support he has today, could give the election to the eventual Democratic nominee. And I cannot be more forcefully in favor of Trump running as a third-party candidate. I love this possibility, and I think everybody should do anything they can to promote Donald Trump, encourage Donald Trump to do exactly that.
Agreed. That piece of paper, not legally binding at all. Who cares? Doesn't matter. It's a piece of garbage.
And Trump says it's not even morally binding, which is interesting. Yeah,
well, that's Trump's moral compass. It's questionable and very strange. Sure. Please run as an independent if you don't win.
The scenario I sort of envision is, we know from Trump's personality that if the Republicans get to the convention over the summer without a nominee, right, if no one has made it past that finish line that they need in order to secure the Republican nomination before the convention, the Republican establishment will likely come together at that convention, and they're not going to say, let's coalesce support around Donald Trump. They're going to say, let's coalesce support under someone other than Donald Trump. More than likely, based on Trump's personality, he would see that as the Republican Party treating him very unfairly. And I could very easily imagine that in that case, he would cry out and say, that's it. I'm taking my toys and going to my sandbox and running as a third-party candidate. So the longer this goes on, I hope Trump does pick up more delegates in the states to come, because the longer this goes without a nominee, the more likely it becomes Republican insiders decide who to coalesce behind to get Trump out, and that will make it more likely Trump flips out and runs as a third-party candidate. That's the scenario that I see.
He already thinks and feels he's been treated unfairly.
Right.
All of this whole time, and which may very well be true, because we know the Republican establishment does not want him to be the nominee.
No doubt about it whatsoever. So we'll continue to follow it. I say, run third party, Donald, please, by all means. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. 24 hours a day. If anything is on your mind, give us a call. Here's a voicemail I received yesterday.
Hey, David. This is Max in Oakland. I just want to let you know the optics on Lewis basically dismissing a song by a black woman about black self-love are not going to come off very well.
Right.
I know you guys are not racist, and I know that Lewis didn't mean anything by it, but literally any other Beyonce song, that would have been fine. But that one was so specifically about black self-love that I think that it might be viewed a little negatively.
Okay, so the backstory is yesterday on the bonus show, Lewis had some critiques about Beyonce's newest song. We received a bunch of feedback about it. Lewis, don't say anything now. Let's address it on the bonus show today and see where we come out on this thing. But criticism going overflowing from the bonus show to the regular show. On today's bonus show, as I mentioned, Lewis will address criticism of his criticism of Beyonce's new song. We will talk about the allegation that pesticides, rather than the Zika virus, might be to blame for microcephaly cases in South America. and the NFL is looking for volunteers. Why would they be doing that, given that the Super Bowl makes so much money? All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.